Hello everyone. In this particular video we shall discuss about the next method in solving the transportation problem. So it is called as Vogels approximation method. Vogels approximation method. So already we have discussed 4 methods in solving the transportation problem. So that is northwest corner rule, least cost entry method, column minima and row minima method. So out of all these 4 methods, so this is the 5th method in solving the transportation problem, and it is a very important method where we get the least transportation cost. So Vogels, it is called as Vogels approximation method. Straight away we shall look into the problem. So the same problem I have taken. So in the previous example also we have discussed regarding this particular problem. So we have factories and warehouses, 4 warehouses and 3 factories. So 19, 30, 50, 10, 70, 30. So this matrix, the numbers in the matrix represents the cost, and we have the available capacity in the last column, that is 7, 9 and 18. At the same time the demand, what is the demand? So that they have mentioned in the last row, that is 5, 8, 7 and 14. So this Vogels approximation method, so this is slightly different than all the 4 methods whatever we have discussed. So in this particular method we are going to find out the penalty, that in the sense the difference with the two numbers in a particular row and in a particular column. So since we find out the penalty, this method is also called as penalty approach method. So this method is also called as penalty approach method. So how to find out the penalty? So let us find out how we can find out the penalties in the row and the columns. So what is penalty? So penalty is nothing but the difference with the least cost in a particular row and the next preceding cost, very next preceding cost, or the nearest cost to that least cost. So penalty can be found out using minimum number or least cost and its very next preceding cost. For example, in the first row, if you consider the first row, least cost is 10, and the very next nearer cost is 19. See, just consider the first row, we have numbers like 19, 30, 50 and 10. So the least cost is 10 over here, and the very next number nearer to that, or very next cost nearer to that, is 19. So the difference with these two costs, 19 and 10, that is what we call it as penalty. So here penalty is 9. Similar way, we have to find out the penalty in all the rows and all the columns. So that is the first step in solving the transportation problem using Vogels approximation method. So let us find out the penalties. So the first row, that is the lowest cost is 10, and the very next number or very next cost nearer to that is 19. So the difference is 19 minus 10, it is 9. So 9 is our penalty. Write it over here. Again, in the second row, consider the second row, 70, 30, 40 and 60. So the least cost here is 30. And the very next number or the very next cost nearer to that is 40. So that is why 40 minus 30, 10 is the penalty. Coming to the third row we have 40, 8, 70 and 20. So out of that, 8 is the minimum cost, and very next number or the very next nearer cost is 20. So 20 minus 8, 12 is my penalty. Now let us calculate the penalty for each columns. So column here, consider the first column where we have 19, 70 and 40. So out of that, 19 is the minimum cost, so the very next cost nearer to that is 40. So that is why 40 minus 19 is my penalty. So 40 minus 19 is 21 is the penalty. Coming to the next column, so again here 30 and 8. So the minimum cost here is 8, and the very next number or the very next nearer cost to that is 30. So 30 minus 8 is 22. Next column, coming to the next column, so here 50, 40 and 70. We have 50, 40 and 70. Out of that, 40 is the minimum cost, and very next cost nearer to that is 50. So that is why 50 minus 40 equal to 10. That is the penalty. Similar way here, again the least cost is 10, and the very next number or the very next cost nearer to that is 20, so that is why 20 minus 10 gives me 10. So these are the penalties. So now we have found out the penalties of all the rows 9, 10 and 12, and again here in all the columns we have found out the penalty, that is 21, 22, 10 and 10. So out of these penalty costs, whichever is highest, so that highest number or the highest penalty cost we have to select for the allocation in the sense, so whenever we get these penalty numbers 9, 10, 12, 21, 22, 10 and 10, for the allocation we have to identify the highest penalty cost, and in that highest penalty cost position, whether it is a column or the row, so there we have to find out the least cost. So now out of these penalties, 22 is the highest penalty cost. I am going to select, so I have put an arrow mark here, so I am going to select this particular column, so where we have got the highest penalty cost. So in that column we have to select the least cost. That is very similar to the previous problems we have solved. So we have to find out the least cost in that particular column where we have got the highest penalty. So I am selecting this particular column, so where we have the highest penalty cost. Now I will select the least cost here, that is 8. Least cost is 8, or the least cost position is 8. And now the same method we have to follow as we have done in the earlier problem, so where we have to look into the supply and demand. So I have a supply of 18 units here. In that particular row I have a supply of 18 units. At the same time I have a demand of 8 units. So the entire demand can be fulfilled with the supply of 18. So the entire demand of 8 can be fulfilled with the supply of 18. So that is why I am allocating 8 to this particular position. So all the demand has been fulfilled. So just strike out that demand, it is 0 now, and just strike out here 18. And I am left with 10 units of supply. So now we have got 0 here. So as we all know, so wherever we get 0, either this row or the column, so wherever we get 0, so we need to strike out that entire column or the row. So here I have got 0 in this particular column, so I am going to strike out the entire column. So one allocation is done. Now coming to the next step, second step, step 2. So now I have deleted one of the column, so I am left with 3 columns and 3 rows. Again we have to find out the penalty for all the rows and all the columns as we did for the previous step. So here the first row, consider the first row. Again we have the least cost as 10, and the very next nearer cost to that is 19, so the difference is 9, that is a penalty. Again here 70, 40 and 60, the minimum cost is 40, and the next minimum or the nearest cost to that is 60, so difference 60 minus 40 is 20. Again in the third row I have the minimum cost as 20, and the very next cost nearer to that is 40, so 40 minus 20 is my penalty. So I have got the penalties as 9, 20 and 20 in the rows. Let us look into the columns. Here, the first column 19, 70 and 40, so out of this the minimum cost is 19, and the very next cost nearer to that is 40, so that is why 40 minus 19 is my penalty, so that is 21. I am writing the penalty over here, 21 is a penalty. Next column, it is 50, 40 and 70. Out of that 40 is the minimum cost and 50 is the next preceding cost, so 50 minus 40 is 10. That is my penalty. Again here 10 is the minimum cost. In this particular third column I have the minimum cost as 10, and the very next cost nearer to that is 20, so that is why 20 minus 10 is my penalty. So what is the next step? So next we have to consider the highest penalty cost out of all these costs in the rows and columns. So in the rows and columns I have 9, 20, 20, 21, 10 and 10. So out of all these penalty costs, 21 is the highest. So that is why I have put an arrow mark over here, so I am considering this particular column for allocation. So I am considering this particular column for allocation. So when we consider this particular column, we have to look into the minimum cost of that particular column. So minimum cost is 19. Minimum cost is 19. So 19 I am going to allocate to that particular position. So what is the demand? So here the demand is 5. Demand is 5, and just look into that row. What is the supply? Supply, we have the supply of 7 units. We have the supply of 7 units. So I can fulfill all the demand of 5 units. So 5 out of 5 can be fulfilled with the supply of 5 units here. So out of 7 I am using 5, so that is why you just strike out 5 over here. I am left with 0 demand, and just allocate 5 to this particular position. And here out of 7 I have used 5, so I am left with 2, supply of 2 units, and the same method has to be followed here. So wherever I have got 0, either the column or the row, so that has to be deleted. So here I have got 0 in this particular column, so that is why I am deleting this entire column, or I am striking out the entire column. Let us move on to the next step. Step 3. So again I am left with 2 columns and 3 rows, and again I have to find out the penalty. So again we are going to find out the penalty here. 10 and 50 I get a penalty as 40. 40 and 60 I will get a penalty as 20. 70 and 20 I will get a penalty as 50. Again here 50, 40 and 70, so minimum cost is 40. 50 minus 40 is 10, so I will get a penalty as 10. Again here 10, 60 and 20, so 10 is the minimum cost. 10 and 20, the next next number, or the nearer number to that least cost is 20, so that is why 20 minus 10 is my penalty. 10 is my penalty. Again, so out of these penalty costs, 40, 20, 50, 10 and 10, which is the highest? So I have got 50 as the highest penalty cost. So just consider that row for the allocation. Now out of that row, which is the minimum cost? Consider the minimum cost position. So here it is 20, least cost position is 20. So just allocate to that particular position. Look into the demand and supply. So we have a demand of 14 and supply of 10 units. We have a demand of 14 and supply of 10 units. So that is why just allocate 10 units to that particular position, and just strike out 10 here. 10, 0, I have left with 0 units of supply, and at the same time I have fulfilled the demand of 10. Just strike out 14, so I am left with 4. I am left with 4, the demand of 4. So now wherever I have got 0, just strike out the entire row. Here I have got the 0, so that is why I am striking out the entire row. Now coming to the next step. Step 4. So here I am left with only 2 columns and 2 rows. So out of that we have to find out the penalty again. So penalty 50 and 10, so 40 is my penalty. Here 40 and 60, so 20 is my penalty. And again coming to the column, so 10, 50 and 40, so 10 is my penalty, and at the same time here 10 and 60, 50 is the penalty. So out of these penalty costs, so 10, 50, 40 and 20, which is the highest penalty cost? That I have to select. So here I have got penalty 50 as the highest penalty. Just consider that particular column. Just consider that particular column, and in that particular column, which is the minimum cost? So 60 and 10 is the minimum cost in that particular column. So just allocate to that particular cell or to that particular position. So just look into the demand and supply. So here we have a demand of 4 and supply of 2. So 2 out of 2 supply has to be used. So I am allocating 2. So I am left with 0 supply. At the same time here, out of 4 demand of 4 units, I have fulfilled 2. So just strike out 4. I am left with 2 units of demand. So here wherever I have got 0, just strike out. Wherever we get 0, just strike out the entire row or column. So here I have got 0, so that is why I am striking out this entire row. Now the last step, moving to the last step of the problem. So here we are left with only 2 numbers in the matrix. that is 40 and 60. So that is why now we are not going to find out the penalty and all, because it is just a common sense that we have two positions and the supply and demand. So we have to identify the least cost. So out of that, the least cost is 40, so just allocate to that particular position. So here we have 7, demand is 7, at the same time the supply is 9. So out of that 9 supply, we are using 7 units. So 7, the demand of 7 is fulfilled, so just allocate 7 to that particular position, and the remaining is 2. So here the demand is 2, at the same time here the demand the supply left out is 2. So out of 9 we have used 7, so that is why we are left with 2, the supply of 2. So just allocate 2 to that particular position. So I have allocated to that particular 2 positions, 40 and 60. So now the allocation, just look into the allocation. So what is the allocation? See, 19, 5, 10, 2, 47, 62, 8, 8, 20, 10. So this is the allocation, final allocation I have got. Hence the minimum transportation cost, so that will be equal to 19 into 5 plus 10 into 2 plus 40 into 7 plus 60 into 2 plus 8 into 8 plus 20 into 10. So that is 95 plus 20 plus 280 plus 120 plus 64 plus 200. So that is equal to 779. The same problem we have solved using northwest corner rule, row minimum method, column minimum method, and also the least cost entry method. But the least transportation cost we have got using this Vogels approximation method. So that is why I have told you Vogels approximation method is a very important method where we get the minimum cost. The cost is rupees 779. So this cost is less than the cost obtained in least cost entry method. So that is the end of the problem. So we can say that Vogels method is the best method to find out the transportation cost, least transportation cost. Thank you.